welcome all of you, our veterans especially, our members, our guests, our honorable speakers, and all our volunteers, all of our members. So thank you for coming. I'd like to invite up Steve Thomason to open our meeting in prayer.
Bless you, Lord Father, creator of the universe, who brings forth bread and wine to our tables. We ask for wisdom from above as we plan for the elections this year. May what we are exposed to today bring the insights we need to make right decisions politically. Above all, we want to honor you by working to promote your values for this wonderful country we love. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Steve. And now I would like to invite our former president, Carol Blanchard, up to lead us all in the Pledge of Allegiance. Carol drove all the way from Palos Verdes to do this.
Thank you. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, and justice for all. Thank you. Be seated.
Thank you, Carol. All right. And we have a new Americanism chair, but I'm sorry to say she's sick today. So I am going to read her Americanism speech, okay? Whenever I see Donald Trump give a speech at one of his rallies, I'm reminded of former President Ronald Reagan. Granted, Mr. Trump can sometimes be a bit brash and offensive, but unlike Mr. Reagan, with his title of the Great Communicator. But there are many similarities between the two men. Mr. Reagan came from the private sector and was not a professional politician. He made a living with his God-given talents through hard work and perseverance. Mr. Trump is also a private sector man in the demanding world of real estate, where one needs common sense and courage to take risky business opportunities. Both outsiders to the Washington, D.C. political scene, they each got involved in politics because of their love for America and the desire to see America thrive. Both men have demonstrated and still demonstrate, in the case of Mr. Trump, a deep and sincere love for America, along with an intense desire to preserve our freedoms and opportunities. Each man has shared his love and respect for America openly for all to hear and see. It would be wonderful to attend a Donald Trump rally. Remember, this is Linda. This is Karen, saying this. It'd be wonderful to attend a Donald Trump rally. Don't you agree? The music, the people dressed in red, white, and blue, hearing Mr. Trump tell how hard he will work to make America great again. We need him, his talents, and his bold patriotism now more than ever. When I was a graduate student at Cal State Northridge, I was fortunate to attend the last political rally that President Reagan gave during his re-election campaign. It was November 1984, and I went to Pierce College in Woodland Hills to hear him speak. I found a photo on the internet of that rally, and it was just as I remember it. Lots of red, white, and blue decorations in the campus amphitheater, patriotic music, and a sunny afternoon. As I sat on the hillside above the amphitheater, so I was able to see President Reagan's motor car drive up right behind the stage and watch Mr. Reagan climb up the steps and give his speech. Right after the last bit of applause, the Secret Service hustled him off the stage, quickly bundled him back into the limo, and off he went. The atmosphere in the rally was electric. There were large signs that read, "We are the Reagan generation." Mr. Reagan filled me with hope and encouragement when he spoke, and his patriotism and love of America spreading out over the large crowd. He unashamedly proclaimed the greatness of America. He reminded us of how fortunate we were to be Americans and how this was a land of opportunity for us. All we needed to do was to work hard, persevere, follow the law, and never, never give up. He was a wonderful inspiration to me. When I hear former President Trump speak now, I remember Mr. Reagan's encouraging and patriotic words. I hope to God that Mr. Trump wins 4 more years in the White House. We need him now so badly. We in this room are all roughly the same age group, so we were the Reagan generation in 1985. Now we are the Donald Trump supporters, and some of us call ourselves MAGA Republicans. I call myself a proud MAGA Republican Trumpster. That's what Karen calls herself. Isn't that cute? And I'm speaking out to my younger family members about how we must reelect former President Trump, if we want to preserve our precious freedoms. In closing, let's stay strong and dedicated. Let's keep fighting and working hard during this important election season. And let's take heart from these 2 final quotes. This is President Reagan in his inaugural message as California governor in 1967. He said, "Freedom must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation, for it comes only once to a people." President Trump, on his Truth Social account, posted recently, "When we win, the curtain closes on the corrupt reign and the sun rises on a new bright future for America." So that's from our New Americanism, Karen Blanco, and I'm sorry she's not here today. She's got a bad cold, didn't want to give you any germs. But didn't she do a nice job? Yeah, thank you. All right, and now I want to bring up Ro Kendall, our Vice President of Program, who's going to introduce first I want to say, excuse me, I have some more introductions. I want to welcome all of our veterans. You're a veteran, would you please raise your hand? Look at all the veterans we have in this room. Thank you, thank you. Because you are brave, we are free. I also want to welcome our esteemed speakers today. We have our U.S. Congresswoman Young Kim with us today. She's graced our presence. She's here from D.C., all the way from D.C. She's brave. And we have our speakers, Will Swaim, and one coming in a minute, and when Ro will introduce. But I want to welcome all of you faithful members and guests. If you're a guest here today, we'll have an opportunity later for us to know who you are, okay? So now I'm going to hand you over to Vice President. One more thing. Okay, I have 3 people I want to acknowledge. I want to acknowledge Shirley Morgan, our former president of 10 years. She was president from 1999 to 2010. Right, Shirley? Yeah. And I have former President Carol Blanchard. Carol, raise your hand. Carol was president from 2018 to 2021, I believe. Yes. And I want Candace Burrows. Candace, where are you? Candace? Here. Candace Burrows. I want to introduce Candace. Now, Candace Burrows is a member, but she has a long line of credits. She was mayor. She was the president of Laguna Niguel Club for 4 terms. She worked with Pat Bates. She was her field coordinator for 7 years for Pat Bates. She is currently the CFRW, which is California Federated Women. She's their vice president of programs. All right, so here you go, Ro.
I'd like to say hello and introduce our keynote speaker today, who is Will Swaim. He's president of the California Policy Center. He's been a journalist for nearly 3 decades. He began in 1990 by covering international business, and in 1995, the Village Voice and LA Weekly, they hired him to launch OC Weekly, the first and still only alternative weekly newspaper in Orange County. More recently, he was the editor of watchdog.org, and he is also president of journalism at Watchdog's nonprofit parent, the Franklin Center for Government and Public Integrity. Will graduated summa cum laude in journalism and with honors in theology from the University of Southern California. He earned an MA in history from UC Irvine, and he's let's see here. He's where he was a California Regents Fellow. He's done a lot. So Will has also. I just want to say that he's a 7th generation Californian, and he has written extensively about California business, media, Politics and Religion. He's also the winner of several print journalism awards and a Golden Mike, a Southern California Broadcasters Golden Mike Award for public affairs commentary. And he does that with the PCP board member, David Bonson. He hosts National Review's weekly radio-free California podcast. Very accomplished. We're very honored and grateful that he's joining us today. Will, please. Thank you.
It always feels intimidating. Good morning. Always feels intimidating to have people applaud before you speak. First of all, thanks to the veterans. I've got a son in the U.S. Army. If you're in the Marines, I apologize. I'm an Army guy now. He's a major. He's based in Germany. He just had our grandchild. I say all this because maybe some of y'all can relate. Totally changed my life. And I mean that sincerely. I am usually sarcastic and facetious. You'll pick up on some of that. But being a grandfather, just of 5 months now, I'm already a veteran of 5 months of grandfathering. What a transformation, just to see the optimism in my son, who carried a rifle for a number of years, and to watch him turn into this very loving and paternal guy. Deeply touched. Also, did not expect the pleasure of being here with our representative, Young Kim. You're a phenomenal fighter. Thank you so much for being here. So, California Policy Center is an organization that's based in California, obviously, maybe not obviously, and right here in Orange County. It was founded by some members of a local group called the Lincoln Club. Some of you may know the Lincoln Club, conservative organization. And they decided that what conservatives really needed in California was, call it a think tank, a group of people who would actually think about the policy problems in California. That is, why don't we have enough water? Why do we have so many homeless people? Why are our energy prices so high? Why does California's unemployment rate have us at the bottom of all 50 states? Why do we have the highest taxes, the highest crime rates, highest murder rate? I could go on. I think you know some of this stuff, but that's sort of the headline news. And so what California Policy Center is set up to do, was set up 10 years ago to do, is to think about free market constitutional solutions to these problems. And I really want to emphasize free market and constitutional, because that puts us at odds with the party of government that's now in power. I came to the center having been a journalist, and I just really want to point out that my path here was not very straight. Mentioning, as Ro did, the fact that I used to work with OC Weekly. Anybody here remember this paper, OC Weekly? No, you people are really smart. Oh, you do? Ro! Oh my gosh. My mother, who has never strayed from the conservative Catholic side of the political spectrum, could not believe when I was hired. I was a Marxist. Let's just start there. And not just a Marxist, but a member of the Communist Party when I went to college. And I'll skip a lot of the transitional story and just say that, you know, that the comment attributed generally to either Winston Churchill or John Adams is really true in my case. If you're not a liberal at 20, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative by 40, you've simply got no brain, right? So a lot of what you see before you is just a guy who has been steeped in a number of years, right? I had that aforementioned child who's now, you know, the father of my grandchild. When I had that guy, I realized, you know, I'm not practicing the things that I preach. I preach we should share everything, and the government can do no wrong, and the government should be responsible for everybody cradle to grave. But I'm raising my child to be a God-fearing patriot who is self-sufficient and wants to get ahead in life and make life good for his own family. I think it's Dennis Prager who says that a liberal is a person who does not preach what they practice. All the liberals I know, frankly, all the liberals I know are very hardworking people. They love their families. They go to church. They work in the community. They own a mortgage on a house in the most master-planned community in America. That's Irvine, California, if you're keeping track. They live lives that are remarkably like yours and mine, and as soon as they get to the voting booth, they pull the lever for somebody who's really as close to socialist as I was at age 20. So one of the things that I think is really imperative to remember is that we're always talking to those people. They are not our enemy. And I really mean this. I think this is really critical for us to remember. Oh, don't get me wrong. There are enemies out there. but they're typically not your neighbor. Typically not. They're not your children. I have in my range of children somebody who's a progressive left-winger all the way to libertarians and conservatives. We all love each other. We all do the best to get along. And it's in that family that we learn how to talk kindly to others with charity toward all. And I think this is really critical. So I hope that as I talk about, in broad terms, things like liberals and communists and Republicans and conservatives, that you understand that I am not a person who thinks the world is that easily divided. I meet good people all across the political spectrum. I disagree vehemently with my friends on the left, vehemently about policy issues, and I still love them and hope for their political redemption, let's call it. So when I was a commie, I was a young kid here in Orange County. I was raised by nice Catholic people. I went to the old mission school in San Juan. Any graduates of the old mission school in San Juan? No. Okay. So I graduated from the old mission school in San Juan, was raised by nice Catholic people, thought I wanted to be a priest, went to USC because my parents said, if you go straight into seminary, you'll know nothing about the world. We love that you want to be a priest, but please just give us 1 year at a major university and then consider becoming a priest. So I went to USC, which is where my parents went. And fight on. Are you a SC person? All right, fellow Trojan. I did not know that. God, all the more reason to love you. So, oh, and you? Oh, Notre Dame. Even closer to God. Okay. So I went to USC and I fell into something in the theology department called liberation theology, which was the idea that God came specifically for the poor to make war on the rich, right? It was a crazy idea. It was brewed up in the hothouse of Catholicism in Latin America primarily, but also Africa. And it was just an offshoot of Marxism. That's all it was. It was just class warfare by other means. And I soon came to the conclusion that I really didn't need Jesus to mediate my introduction to Karl Marx. I could go straight to the father, Karl Marx. And so I went to UC Irvine, studied Marxist theory. I want to say this. I studied Marxist theory at a university paid for with your tax dollars. When Roe mentions that I was a Regents Fellow in the University of California for, I think, 3 years, I want to point out your tax dollars allowed me to study Marxist theory, and the entire thrust of that investigation, that inquiry of mine back then, that academic interest, was to tear down the bourgeoisie. There's a great old line, by the way, a footnote here from a guy some of you may remember called Andy Warhol. He was a fringy artist guy from New York City. Warhol said there's nothing more bourgeois than the fear of being bourgeois. That was me, right? Very middle-class kid, terrified of being a middle-class kid. So revolutionary stuff attracted me. But then I have children, then I started a newspaper, and then you run a business and you raise kids, and as Churchill says, you become a conservative roughly by 40. That's about how long it took. I probably spoke and rolled over at precisely the median point as a child, right? I'm just a very average guy in that regard. No God appearing to me on the road to Damascus to knock me off a mule and have me become, God's warrior. I was a slow learner, or an average learner, let's say. So one of the things that I learned being on the left, I learned while working for a guy named Larry Agron. Anybody know Larry Agron? Mayor of Irvine sometime? Yeah. I worked for Larry Agron, and one of the first things that he taught me was how to get elected in a conservative community. And the most important lesson I learned was that Republicans like cops and firefighters. Republicans love and admire cops and firefighters. So he knew that to get elected in a city like Irvine, which then was very, very conservative, I think Republican registration was like 4-1 Republican back then. This is the late 80s. He had to get the endorsements of cops and firefighters. Fortunately, the unions representing cops and firefighters are easily bought off. They don't care whether you're Adolf Hitler or Karl Marx, Joseph Stalin, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, or Mao Zedong. As long as you sign off on the union contract that gives them earlier retirement, greater pay and benefits, and total control over the workplace. Give them those things, and they will bankroll your campaign to get elected. So Larry Agron, a guy who was a friend of Tom Hayden's and Jerry Brown's, really friendly. That's how I met those people, was through Larry, who was a leader of the Berkeley Free Speech movement back in the 60s, who became the head of UCLA's public health department and pushed it toward the progressive left. That guy was endorsed every single election cycle by police and firefighters. Teachers, of course. but cops and firefighters. So Larry takes me to my first union meeting in 1988, I think it was, and we go to meet with the police union. This is going to become important here in just a moment. What up, brother? All right. So we go to this first meeting of the police union in Irvine, and you're sitting around a round table like this with 3 cops, and they've got their biceps showing, their other guns. And I'm sitting there with Larry, who's as nebbishy as I am, and we're sitting across from these cops. And a little small talk, and then they say, you know, we've got this new collective bargaining agreement in front of you, and if you're elected, we'd sure like to make sure that's going to go through. I looked over at Larry thinking he was going to tell the jackbooted thugs of authoritarian capitalism what they could do with their contract. And he said the opposite. He said, of course I'm for that. All of that stuff in your contract makes total sense to me. Of course I'm going to sign off. So the police chief turns to me and he says, so Will, you're the guy who's running the campaign? Yes, sir. Bring Larry by on Monday. We'll have 2 squad cars, a canine dog, a couple motorcycle cops, and some other patrol officers, and you'll get your picture with Larry, okay? That photo, which we took on that Monday, 3 days later, ran on every campaign brochure Larry had. Police, back Larry Agron. The Republican guy, who was truly a law and order guy, got run over in that election. We just destroyed him. And we did it in part because we had the backing of government unions. Teachers, cops, firefighters, every union wants to be in the pocket, or they want to have the candidate to be in the pocket of the union. So if you ask why California is so screwed up, I will tell you that the assessment of the California Policy Center is you must start with the problem of government unions. Now, I love Ronald Reagan, but let me just point out that when Reagan was governor, Reagan and I have this thing in common. He comes out of the union movement. I come out of the union left-wing movement, right? And so by the time he's governor, he's only been out of the union movement for about 5 or 6 years. And so he's still got, I think, some of that thinking. And one of the first things that Ronald Reagan does is sign off on a bill that allows government employees, but only public safety, only cops and firefighters, to collectively bargain. That's what happens in the 1960s. And that's what kickstarts the reign of terror by the government unions. Reagan thinks, I can keep this in a bottle. They'll always give to me, they'll always give to Republicans because cops and firefighters are conservative. And for a few years, that's true. But Jerry Brown comes in, and guess what? Who do the cops and firefighters support now? Jerry Brown. They support Jerry Brown. Despite all of his radical politics, the cops, firefighters, teachers, the Caltrans workers, the guys at the DMV, you name it, anybody who's in government decides we're all in on this guy. And they start bankrolling Democratic campaigns. And in return, what Jerry Brown does in 76 and 78 is to allow everybody who's in government work to unionize. So then in the 80s, while the federal government is taking off under Ronald Reagan and America is beginning to recover, California is starting to decline in really material ways. Slowly at first, and then more quickly. I mean, ask yourself about the rise of the teachers union and the decline of public education in California. The California Teachers Association is today the most powerful, wealthiest financier of political campaigns in the state. If you read the newspapers, they'll tell you it's business people. It's this or that corporation, right? It's Uber, it's Lyft, it's Microsoft, it's Apple. It's always the private sector. This is all bunk. The largest contributors year after year are government unions. The CTA, the California Teachers Association, every election cycle, every 2 years, raises and spends $500 million, over $500 million, almost $600 million now that I'm adding it in my brain, almost $600 million every 2 years, all the way down from your local school district, all the way up to Sacramento. And if there's any money left over, they deploy it in red states, blue states, to help elect union-friendly candidates in those places. So the problems in California, all of the dysfunction that we talk about here in California that really begins in the 1970s with Jerry Brown has accelerated to the point where we now have a Democratic supermajority that can get almost anything it wants passed. Remember those police sitting with Larry Agron around the table? They didn't care that Larry wanted to have a nuclear-free zone, a sister city with the Sandinista government of Nicaragua. They didn't care about that. They didn't care that he was going to insist that if you owned a home and wanted to rent a room, that you had to rent it to a gay person. Now listen, I'm very libertarian on the issue of, marriage between men and men or whatever. I'm just very libertarian on that, despite the fact that I'm supposedly a Catholic. What I mean to say is that's a personal decision. Larry Agron wanted to say in 1988 that if you owned a room and you wanted to rent it, you had to rent it to anybody who showed up, including a person whose lifestyle you didn't approve of and might not have wanted around your house. Well, we could get into that argument. My point is the cops didn't care. They didn't care about any of this. Firefighters didn't care. The teachers loved it. And at the end of the day, you have conservative members of unions using their dollars to help support radical candidates for public office. And those politicians, once they get into office, return the favor. Does anybody remember Assembly Bill 5 that just passed a couple of years ago, AB 5 it's sometimes called? This was a bill that said you could not be an independent contractor. You couldn't be a translator, a speech pathologist working for yourself and just helping people out here and there. You couldn't be a photographer, a freelance writer, couldn't be a wedding planner. You had to be an employee of a company. Uber drivers, it was aimed, thank you. The bill was ostensibly aimed at people who drove for Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash. That's what they said. But what they included was every job category. You might remember the quick history here. Uber and Lyft and DoorDash sued immediately and got themselves exempted. Also exempted, every business that had a friend inside the Capitol. So my own newspaper industry famously was editorializing against Assembly Bill 5. They pointed out, look, if this passes, if we're not allowed to use freelancers and independent contractors, we won't have any photographers, we won't have any freelance writers, we won't have people who deliver our newspapers. We're going to go out of business. So they were editorializing against it, and the author of the bill, who's now the head of the California Labor Federation, Lorena Gonzalez, said, you know what? You guys are exempted. Immediately, as if switched by a button, the newspaper industry became huge fans of Assembly Bill 5, right? So that's how the system works. Labor elects politicians who get into office and return the favor with higher benefits, higher pay, lower responsibility, greater authority over the workplace, and we all get what they call in the oil business the shaft. We get whatever's left over. So CPC works hard all the time on these kinds of government regulation issues, but primarily by focusing on the role of government unions. I'm going to speed ahead here and talk about something that happened in 2018. Can anybody talk to me about the Janus decision? Anybody know the Janus decision, Supreme Court? The young lady in the back, Rebecca Friedrichs, was the first case that was brought just like this. So Rebecca's case was called Friedrichs v. CTA versus California Teachers Association, that is. Her case got locked up 4-4 when Antonin Scalia was found dead in his apartment or hotel, rather, in Texas. So the court locked up 4-4. The very next year, a guy named Mark Janus comes in, and he sues on the same grounds. Mark Janus's argument, like Rebecca Friedrichs' argument, was very simple. It was, look, just because I'm a government employee doesn't mean that you can shake me down for money to give to a political organization called a union, and that union can use my money to broadcast decisions I hate or political positions I hate. It's a violation of my free speech rights. And you know what? The Supreme Court in 2018 voted 5-4 in favor of that argument, that it was illegal for government to force. Now, keep in mind, it was illegal for government to force its employees to support a political organization. See, union membership became voluntary. Unfortunately, in that same day, June 27, 2018, Jerry Brown, who was then governor, signed a bill into law. The same day, June 27, 2018, Jerry Brown signs a law that says it is illegal for any government official to tell a worker about this right not to join a union, right? So Supreme Court says you don't have to belong to a union. Jerry Brown says, okay, but we're going to make sure you don't know about it, right? And I could go on with all the regulations we've identified. There are 8 laws that were passed under Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom that make it almost impossible for a government employee to back out of their union. And so the result is all of these unions, I mentioned that the CTA, the teachers union, brings in about $600 million every 2 years, every election cycle. All combined, the unions bring in $1.9 billion every election cycle. 1.9 billion. California has 12% of the nation's population. We have 25% of its government union members. 12% of the country's population a quarter of all of its government workers, of the country's workers, okay? So the problem that we confront every single day at California Policy Center is how do we fight this? And we fight it in a couple of critical ways. We organize local elected officials, number one. We work with mayors, city council members, county supervisors, and school board members to help them understand the problem of government regulation, the virtues of the free market, not just philosophically, but how it works, and how to negotiate with government union members. We have thousands of these local officials who belong to our organization called the California Local Elected Officials Project. Second, we work on policy. The most important policy you may have heard about recently is we wrote Assembly Bill 1314. I think I got those numbers right. It's been a couple of years. And in 1314, a guy named Bill Asaley, young representative out of Riverside County, carried the bill in there. The state would have required all school districts to let parents know if their kids are making material changes to their permanent record. Okay? Specifically, what we had found out was that the state government was encouraging districts to tell teachers to lie to parents about their children transitioning their genders, right? So you send your little grandchild off to school one morning, you think she's doing great, you find out a couple of days later that the teachers are talking to her about the fact that little Janie's actually little Jimmy, she's just trapped in a boy's body, and you don't find this out from the school because the school is operating under guidance from the state which says, do not tell parents about this because parents will kill, injure, mistreat their children. So we have to keep this secret. You know who else does this to children? I'm just going to say this. My Catholic Church protected priests who did that. Okay? And I'm talking, no offense to my fellow, my confreres here, but we had a horrible problem with this. And the problem was secrecy. And so this policy was about breeding secrecy breeding a kind of sense of suspicion between children and their parents to destroy the family, I would argue. It's really diabolical. So we drafted this policy that said, look, if a kid talks to a teacher about changing their sexual identity, you got to let the parents know in 72 hours, right? Just let them know. You don't have to take a side on it. You don't have to tell them, this is the parents don't even have to. The parents are free to do it. The bill says the parents can do with that information whatever they want to do. Now, I have a very strong feeling about what I hope they would do. It's absolutely clear to me. But the bill says it's up to the parent to decide what's best for the child. Not the school official, not the teacher, not a bureaucrat in Sacramento. The bill was deemed so dangerous that the education committee person said, we can't even read this because children will die if we read it. So the bill was killed. We knew that would possibly happen. So we'd already drafted it for adoption at the local school district level. Today, 15 school districts have adopted this. Now, before you cheer and say yay for those courageous people, some of you already know that what happened next was that Governor Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta sued those districts. We arranged for legal coverage of the first district to do that out in, Chino Valley, Chino Valley, and so we brought in a group called the Liberty Justice Center. They're the people who represented Mark Janus in the Supreme Court. So one of the things that we do is we craft policy. We try to help local officials understand how that policy can be implemented at the local level, even if it's refused at the state level, and then we try to provide legal protection. That is very, very hard in California, as you can imagine. 1 month ago, we hired our first staff attorney, a woman named Julie Hamill. I encourage you to look her up online. If you follow Twitter, and I don't recommend that you get into Twitter. It's like recommending that you go into your sewage system. Don't do it. If you're not already there, don't do it. It's just best not to get involved. Life is too short. I'm pretty sure that God is not present on Twitter. I know that he's omnipresent, but I'm just pretty sure that he has a real distaste for that sort of thing. Anyway, Julie is remarkable, a brilliant young attorney who now works for us. And among the other things that we're looking at, I keep picking this up. Have you noticed? Excuse me just one sec. Oh my God, it's really good. Oh, thank you. So, we're looking right now at the possibility of suing Gavin Newsom because Gavin Newsom has decided that he has found something else that is too terrible for our eyeballs. and that is the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association's Taxpayer Protection Act. If you don't know about TPA, the Taxpayer Protection Act, it is really a tightening of the bolts on Prop 13. Because you know who hates Prop 13? Government unions. Because government unions, remember I said that California Policy Center starts with this assessment that government unions are really the key to the problem of fixing California because they get so much cash. If you get a salary from the state of California or your local government, chances are very good that you're part of a union. You have to pay some of that money to these unions, and they want to keep that pipeline moving because it allows them to fund democratic politics, right? The Democrats like it, they win, and so too do the union members and the unions themselves. So it's the party of government versus everybody else. Well, Gavin Newsom looks at Prop 13 the way that all people on the left do as a problem because they can't grow the size and scope of government. Just a quick number here for you. Anybody know how much the state budget has grown under Gavin Newsom in 5 years? We're up, that's the deficit, right? The deficit is $73 billion. Just the deficit, which is a funny thing to think about. But what Gavin Newsom has done is to more than double the budget that he inherited from Jerry Brown. Now, Jerry Brown was one of the freest spending governors we've ever had. He raised the budget in his final year to $140 billion. It's now over $300 billion. So Newsom knows that if tax dollars don't keep pouring in through property tax, through income tax, through fees that are buried in everything that you buy and sell, gasoline, don't even get me started on that one, Newsom knows this is a problem for the future of growing government. So he has tried to keep the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association initiative off the ballot in November, even though it's legally qualified, even though it's been vetted by constitutional attorneys and by the state itself. Newsom is now suing with our money to keep a citizens' initiative, that is an initiative from people like us, off the ballot. This is our government at work. So California Policy Center is jumping in by suing Newsom. We're preparing our lawsuit now. By suing him on violating a state law which says the government can't get involved in politics. This is pure, clean, simple involvement in politics in which our government is trying to shut us down. And in a 1976 case, Stanson v. Mott, the California Supreme Court said the government cannot put its thumb on the scale of politics, cannot do that. But it is doing it here under the bright lights. So what CPC does is we help, we help defend policies we produce and which we promulgate, that is, we distribute through local officials primarily. We also lobby at the state level. I can tell you that the guy who goes spelunking for us inside the Capitol is really like a proctologist. It is terrible in there for a conservative, I can just tell you. I got invited a few months ago when I was up in Sacramento to go visit with a very moderate Democrat, a guy I like an awful lot. Very powerful, but very moderate. Just a guy who really knows which side his bread is buttered on. And he said, "Oh, Will, hate to ask you this, but would you mind come in the back door of my office?" So if you think that there are reparations due some people, I'm just going to tell you it's conservatives. Okay, that was a terrible joke to make, but I do want to talk about reparations. If anybody has the appetite, I've written at great length about this and have started a scholarly group to work on the problem of reparations in California, but that's for another time. So I want to hold out one last bit of hope. The California Policy Center also has used the Janus decision, and despite the fact that the state is trying to keep government workers inside unions paying dues so the Democrats can stay in power, we've succeeded in getting out about 300,000 government workers. What's the last count, Houston, wherever you are? Houston? What's our last count on government workers out of the unions? What's the total now? Is it 400,000 this year? Okay, so about 400,000 government workers have left the unions. That represents, in turn, about $400 million, which the government unions don't have to play with in politics. $400 million is a material number. We have a long way to go. But the only way these government workers know that they can get out of the union is if we tell them so. So CPC spends a lot of time every single day thinking about how to communicate with government workers where they are in the job to help them get out of their union. And I'll tell you, their interests are not purely philosophical, generally. The first people, like Rebecca Friedrichs, to get out of the decision, I have 2 times as much time as I thought I had. Is that right? 2 minutes? Okay. So Rebecca Friedrichs can tell you that she was one of the first to get out because she was so politically motivated. After Janice came down, she was gone. She was out of the union. But for most union members today, what they're really entranced by is they love the idea that if they get out of the union, they don't have to pay dues, and that saves them about $1,000 a year. That's the number one reason for getting out. Number 2 reason is, whenever I ask the union for help, they never come. But if the drunk down the hall who is beating up on his fellow employees, if that guy needs the union, they are there lickety-split to help that guy. So I could tell you some horror stories, but this is a mixed audience and probably best for cigars and bourbon some other time. So I'm told that I have almost no time left over, and before we get to the Q&A, I would just like to be able to ask my friend Robert Mycone to come up and say a few words about how you guys can get engaged in this kind of work with us, just as volunteers, not asking for full time. Y'all have earned your retirements if that's what you're up to. And if you're like my mom and dad, you're not really retired at all. Life has gotten a lot busier. Robert, can I hand you the mic?
Thank you very much, Will. And we're going to have a Q&A that you can ask Will all the questions you've been stacking up since he started. Some of you know my name is Robert Mycone, and let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was one of the founders of the California Policy Center. In, 2013 it was founded. As a member of the Lincoln Club Board of Directors, we initiated a number of nonpartisan issues that were very, very difficult to work on. The Lincoln Club spends its time trying to get candidates elected and trying to take some power away from the unions. But California Policy Center was organized as a completely nonpartisan, issue-oriented organization that does not endorse candidates. Is that correct? Does not endorse candidates. So that takes them completely out of the political spectrum when it comes to the power structure. But the unfortunate reality is certain conservative people or organizations that we would sanction, in fact, don't have the detailed information they need to fight the good fight. So what attracted me to California Policy Center originally, and still to this day, is the ability to actually add meat to the bones of the detail on how to make the arguments and make the positive argument as to why we would want to belong to a nonpartisan organization, and that why we'd want a conservative free market Judeo-Christian solution to things as opposed to a top-down government union solution. So that's what drives me. So in accordance with that, we're thinking about, actually decided to do it if there's enough interest, to organize a California Policy Club right here in Laguna Woods. Well, what does that mean? Well, does anybody belong to the Republican Club? That's a club. There are other clubs like the Bridge Club. Does anybody belong to the Bridge Club? I do. There must be a couple other hands here. Anybody belong to the Chicago Club or the New York Club or the Dancing Club? There's 250 clubs in Laguna Woods. And what clubs do is they get to write a charter, they get to write a mission statement, and then they get access to TV6. They can do live interviews. They can promote their events. They can promote their speakers. They can collect money within some parameters. They can collect money as long as they give GRF the proper share of the money. Do you know that? They can, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. That's business in the nonprofit world. So on your table, you'll see a sign-up sheet. And the sign-up sheet, the regulations in Laguna Woods in the Recreation Department, they need your name, your address. We have all that, but if you write it down, it makes it easier on us. They need your signature, and then we need your email. Don't really need the phone number. But if you fill out the top 6 lines, if you're interested in working on, supporting, asking questions about, creating advocacy for, or doing research on any one of these issues, the primary issue California Policy Center has made a huge impact on is the teacher parental notification, where the government doesn't want to tell the parents what the kid is up to. Well, that nationwide, I saw polls at 85%. Who doesn't want parents to be notified? I can't come up with a reason. Can you come up with a reason? None of us have talked about this, can possibly come up with a reason. And yet they're 15% of the populace when polled says that it's okay. I don't care what my kid's doing in school as long as the teachers are taking good care of them. Oh, great. So if you'll fill out, there's pens on the table. Houston, there's pens on the table? Pens on the table. Take time during the Q&A, fill out your name and sign it and all that. Put your email and phone number down there. We're going to convene a meeting with some powerful speakers. There is no cost to this at all. You will not be asked for money. It's not a contributory thing. This is just an indication of interest. Any expenses will be paid by Robert Mycone for the first year. And then we're going to set up a board, if we can organize this, where we vote on which issues we're going to work on. One that kind of gets me in Laguna Woods is why our HOA dues keep going up all the time, including in 2000, the year that they shut down 80% of capacity that was accessible to us, and then raised dues by 15%. Boy, I wish I had a gig like that. Boy, I wish I had a gig like that. So if you're interested, we will convene meetings. We will honor everybody's opinion. And this is just an indication of interest. No contributions will be accepted or asked for. So with that in mind, I'm going to bring Will back up, and we're going to handle any questions that you may have. He's going to answer the questions.
Thank you. All right, Madame. Yeah, Robert is just reminding me that there's literature at the table about what we do.
I'd like to know who the president is of your organization.
Who is the president of CPC? That's me. Yes, ma'am. Is that okay? Done? Mark Bucher is on our board. Yes, so some of you know that with Robert, it was also Bob Lowen. You may know that name. Mark Bucher, Mike Capaldi, former head of the Orange County Republican Party. Some brilliant guys.
Okay. Here, hang on. Are you backing Roberta Friedrich?
Rebecca? I'm not sure what you mean by backing exactly. The question is, do we back Rebecca Friedrichs? First of all, close personal friends with Rebecca and her son who plays baseball. Love that guy. But yes, Rebecca and CPC work in parallel together all over the place. She's also really deeply invested in this problem of government unions, of course. In the back.
Okay, Proposition 1 lost by a very narrow margin. It's out there that Governor Newsom has given the order to count ballots that were previously disallowed in order to push that through. Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, in fact, not only did he say he would, he did. He did this. So Proposition 1 was this very controversial idea of Gavin Newsom's, that he was going to finally solve the problem of homelessness in California by creating a whole bunch of rehabilitation facilities, primarily for the mentally ill. And please hear me on this. I worked with homeless people, mental illness and drug abuse, real problems. But what I can also tell you is that Governor Newsom doesn't have any idea how to get this problem handled. If you really want to look at the most successful models, they're almost always free market and religiously oriented models, like Orange County Rescue Mission, founded by Jim Palmer. One of the biggest and most successful efforts. Why does it work? It's spiritually based. It is abstinence-based. You don't get to live there and continue to use drugs. You don't get to use there and continue to hurt people. There are strict rules. The state wants to do the same thing, but with no spirituality, and the result is that though Gavin Newsom has spent $20 billion in 5 years, $20 billion, more than all previous governors combined before him, in California, I mean. $20 billion, the homeless rate has gone up under Gavin Newsom. So Prop 1 was he needs $6.7 billion more, he says. Then he's going to really solve this problem. Well, the problem was that it didn't pass. And I think, number one, the first thing to point out in this is I shouldn't say it didn't pass. It passed by a marginal number. It was supposed to pass overwhelmingly, like by 60% of the vote it was supposed to pass. But it came down to just a few thousand votes. And I would argue, number one, that's evidence that even moderates in California are starting to wake up. The government continues to suck in cash, promising to solve problems it doesn't solve, and then says the problem is we just need more money. But the key thing that you asked about back there is, did Gavin Newsom try to go back in and clean up the vote count? Yes, 100%. The documents are in. We've seen the letters go out. And we talked about this on the podcast that Roe mentioned that I run with National Review called Radio Free California. We broke down the numbers. Gavin Newsom spent millions of dollars out of a PAC, a political action committee that he organized, millions of dollars, to send Democratic activists into heavy Democrat precincts to check out ballots rather, which had been disqualified for technical grounds. Didn't sign it, weren't registered, wrong address, wrong polling place, any number of technical reasons that a vote was set aside. Newsom wanted those counted, but only in Democrat districts, because he assumed that those were the districts that were going to make a marginal difference for him. That if you came down to Orange County, you'd probably get your butt kicked. So he went into these Democratic districts, and sure enough, they call this curing. It's a really nice word, curing a ballot. And you can only imagine what might have happened if a Republican president happened to call a Secretary of State in, let's say, Georgia, and are you sure that all those ballots that were disqualified in Georgia might not add up to 11,000 votes that would put me back in the job? Right? So the thing that Trump did is the thing that Newsom did, and there is almost no coverage of this in the California media. Almost none. It is precisely, I would tell you, the thing that Donald Trump did. Now, let me be fair. Donald Trump did it himself. He should not have said a peep about this. He should have let a political action committee handle the entire call. He should not have been involved. Donald Trump cannot keep his hands off things that Donald Trump wants to touch. And the problem is that and that only. Because the bare facts after that are that Trump and Newsom did the same thing, and the media went ballistic when Trump did it, and is absolutely silent and conspiratorial when Newsom does the same thing. So that's how they actually got a few thousand extra votes, was by going into those districts, curing the ballots, and getting them qualified. Madame.
I signed 3 recall papers for Gavin Newsom, and he was reelected. How did that happen?
So you sign up, you support these recall efforts. And I'm just going to say philosophically, I first of all, love the recall. This guy should go. He is damaging the state in real time. Because ordinarily, my philosophy is we already have a recall possibility. It's called a regular election. But here's the reason what happened is Gavin Newsom can go out, when you're facing a recall, campaign finance limits do not apply. Gavin Newsom knows that when there's an election, he can go down to the people who he is regulating, the business interests specifically, and that they will kick in money. So his political action committee in the last recall, I want to say it raised $24 million, which he put into a political action committee, right? Because he only spent a little of it when he won. He put, I think it was $21 million into a political action committee. That's the political action committee, activists into local districts. So in California, you got to really be careful of these recalls because it allows our opponents as well to raise cash. And I'm just going to say this. I think this is an important point. You ask, how did it happen that he won? Because most Californians, I'm just going to say this, do not think deeply about politics. They don't think deeply about it. For them, it is tribal only. Like, I'm a Democrat, I hate Donald Trump, and therefore I'm going to pull the lever for anybody who's not a Republican, right? It is impulsive and instinctive, and I know this because I used to be on that side. We are proud to be Democrats, and in California, being a Democrat is affiliated with a bunch of virtues, which, as I said earlier, many of my Democratic friends do not practice the virtues they preach. So that's number one. Number two is we don't have a majority of voters on our side. It's a simple matter of not just registration, but getting out the vote. In sheer numbers, I think there's 7 million registered Republicans, I think is the number right now, 7 million. That's more than most state population, or many state populations, and it certainly would make us one of the largest Republican parties in the United States, but it's not enough here. And most of our side, the Republican side, the conservative side, does not get out and vote. Demoralization, perhaps, just a lack of motivation, maybe. I don't know how to explain all of this. But the good news is that Donald Trump is bringing some weird people into the party. When I say weird, I mean people you would not maybe expect to see here. Mexican Americans, Latinos in general, and African Americans, especially African American men, are moving so rapidly to Trump that they are terrifying the Democrats. The Democrats thought they owned, almost literally owned, those voters. So again, along with my opening remark that I really ask us to always be kind to a liberal because you don't know what's going to help them become a conservative, but it's not going to be meanness. I was converted in part because people like you spoke nicely to me, and they treated me with intelligence. They treated me as an intelligent and independent thinker. And I would just ask you, please, consider just one at a time. If we all just reach one person, be kind, be loving, be smart. And that's part of California Policy's mission, is to try to get people into the conservative movement. We're not a political organization. We're a policy organization. We're a philosophy organization. Does that help answer the question? Thank you. Sir.
You basically answered most of my question from the standpoint that a lot of us that have been here in California for many, many years and in Orange County, say for 50, what happened to the Lincoln Club and what is their activity right now? And why did we go from a Republican state to a Democrat state?
Well, I think, let me answer the first question. I'm going to ask my friend Nick, who just like happens to be here. Anybody know the movie Annie Hall with Woody Allen? Say whatever you might. There's this great moment in the movie Annie Hall where Woody Allen is standing with Annie to go see a movie, and he's listening to a Columbia University professor talk about a film, and Woody Allen says, "You're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. I happen to have the guy you're talking about right over here." And my guy is Nick, who's with the Lincoln Club. So I'm going to ask you, Nick, if you can answer the question about, what does the Lincoln Club do today? But I'll tell you, what happened to California's government unions, that's what happened. Track back the time, and I know I'm just offering correlation, but I've also, I think, offered here some causation. It's government unions. They are first kicked off by Ronald Reagan in the late 60s. Not much happens until Jerry Brown universalizes government unionization, forced unionization of all of California's workers. That raises hundreds of millions of dollars. There's another huge chunk of voters who came in because of the environmental movement, and we could talk for another hour about the rise of the environmental movement in California and how that became part of the Republican brand and the Democratic brand, and how Republicans became the boogeyman, the guys who are all for destroying the planet. But it's that money, follow the money of government unions, which until CPC started fighting these guys with the Janus decision, were able to raise over $2 billion every election cycle. They can still raise about $1.8 billion every election cycle. That's a lot of money, but it's better than $2.2 billion. And with more dollars, we'll get more people out. Nick, can you just say a word maybe about the Lincoln Club?
I'll be honest with you. I'm not actually an official member of the Lincoln Club or employee. I actually run the Lincoln Institute. So we're basically attached as its own nonprofit. But the Lincoln Club is still around. It's still putting investment and donor money into candidates all across the state. And but they're also working on something really big and trying to build the infrastructure, kind of reverse engineering a lot of what the left has done in outreach and through nonprofits and through PACs and a lot of stuff. So when I go up, I'll kind of talk a little bit about it as a whole, but yeah.
Will, do you have any CPC events coming up, and where can people get more information about California policies?
You are such a good host. Okay, so if you go to our website, you all have information on the table, but it's californiapolicycenter.org. That's californiapolicycenter.org. That's our website. You can find out all kinds of things. Sign up for our newsletter right on that front page.
Oh, Will. Oh, my golly. Don't you love him? Isn't he great? Yeah. Oh, my golly. Thank you, Will, for coming today. Ro would like to just... Here, Ro?
Thank you. I would just like to present you with this honorarium from our club because we so appreciate what you're doing and speaking to us, and we hope you'll come back. Thank you, Will.